Now, talking about from the last video, how at a gathering in 2010, I had met a Saint Germain channel named Ashamare McNamara, and that I'd put myself under his wing, really, because I felt like he had essential teachings about masculine power and not judging that power. And I had judged my own, and I needed to learn from someone who wasn't judgmental of that. It's a real short summary of the last one. But I knew that I had to follow Jeshua's lead, and he had shown this profound forgiveness and co-creativity with those who had been Romans, including the Ascended Master known as Saint Germain. And the two of them had come together to create the atonement plan. And I'm trying to follow my teacher, my guru, and I realize I have to put myself essentially under Saint Germain, under Ashamare, and go with what I knew to be a group of people who had been Romans, though I'm not sharing this with people necessarily, unless I'm called to, and to go to John of God in Brazil. Probably you've heard of John of God. John of God came to me originally at a miraculous time when I was trying to find answers for my nephew Chris's physical condition, which was he had a brain tumor. And I had a session with a man named Govinda Miller. He's an astrologer recommended by Jeshua. And I had just found out about Chris's condition the night before. And I was spending the whole day on the internet trying to come up with good answers to brain tumors, more positive answer than you often hear. Couldn't come up with anything, and I thought, well, I've got this session with Govinda too, but I don't really want to talk with him. I want to keep going on and looking for answers, because I don't see any answers out there, and I really want to find something. But I think Govinda's a nice guy. I don't want to reschedule. I'll give him a call. So I call him up, and usually he's very pleasant. And Dave, how are you? Small talk. Really lovely guy. But this time it's not like that. This time it's first thing he says to me is, "I have to tell you about my wife's healing." And I go, "Oh, okay, Govinda, hi, and I have to tell you about my wife's healing." And his wife had advanced lupus, was near death, and went to John of God as a last resort and was healed. Now, imagine the timing on this. For the first time in my life ever, I'm desperately seeking for a very unusual healing story, because I'm encountering this terrible situation in my life where my beloved nephew Chris, who's a young kid, has just found out he has a huge brain tumor. So, and this is what happens. The first person I talk to that day starts talking to me about a miraculous healing he's seen at John of God, which I'd never heard of before. John of God is a trance healer who they say has spent 700 years of incarnations getting to the point of being able to do what he does. And if you look up John of God, he's been charged with some inappropriate behavior lately. I'm not going to comment on that one way or the other, but I will comment to say there's no question there are miracles occurring in this place. No question whatsoever. And it had been a lifelong goal ever since speaking to Govinda several years before to go to John of God. And now Ashamare, the Saint Germain channel, is a guide for the Casa, that's what they call the place where John of God is, in Brazil. And he's leading a trip just a few months after I meet him. So I'm signing up to go on the trip. So I hope that's all clear. I met this guy who's a Saint Germain channel. In the way of mastery tradition, we're taught that Saint Germain was a Roman, one of the Roman soldiers who was going to nail Jeshua to a cross. He has a conversion when he meets Jeshua's eyes, drops the hammer, and goes off to develop and become and is Saint Germain, this Ascended Master, who comes to England in 2010 with Jeshua, JM channeling Jeshua, Ashamare channeling Saint Germain, at this extraordinary gathering, which includes the announcement of the turning of the age. I, who have for years, after having been given a sense of a past life connected with King David of Israel, have been relating to this idea of judging my masculine power. And I look at the Romans and I think, well, they didn't judge their masculine power. I need to learn from them. I need to be humble. And so my guidance is follow a Charmeret, go to John of God. I just intuitively knew there were two strands going on for me. I had a healing I was hoping for physically in my own Dave Shock life, if you want to put it that way, but really behind the scenes, and it's something I've shared with almost no one, there was a parallel healing taking place around the soul of David, of Israel. This soul, and the orchestration is extraordinary, and I knew intuitively that the beings who were there with the Charmeret's group and some from friends who were there with another group would be walking me through, and they weren't going to be conscious of this, I didn't believe. We're going to be walking me through a series of masculine initiations. And it's exactly what happened. They'd come up to me and they'd say, let's go do this, and it would be kind of a challenging, kind of male scary kind of thing, and a series of these things went on. And I was thinking about how much to talk about all this. Let's just say a series of these things go on. And they culminate in one event where I'm going to meet a friend. If you walk past the casa and go up over this little hill, there's a whole kind of wilderness area which is off the grid. What they say at the casa is, the casa, whether you believe this or not, it's up to you, but the casa has an arrangement with the nature spirits so that the snakes don't bite people who are there and so on. But if you're off the grid, you're on your own. And so I'm guided to meet this friend of mine who I knew was a Roman in previous life. And I'm going down this hill, and if I walk by the casa, I'll go to the hill. And he and I had agreed we were going to meet there sometime. Well, middle of the trip, or it's getting near the end of the trip, and I hadn't seen him in a while, but we were trying to arrange a time to meet at this particular location. And Joshua, as I'm walking down to the casa, just says, keep going on, walk down there now. And I'm going, but I'm supposed to have an appointment. I'm waiting to go there until I see my friend. And he says, no, just go now. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why we're going. So I go up over the hill, and sure enough, of the entire people in all that, and the whole town, the whole area around the casa, first person I see walking the other way is this friend. So he leads me down the hill into this tall grass. He actually tells me about it. He says there are some of the old casa buildings down this hill in this tall grass down towards this river. Grass is 4 feet high. 3.5, 4 feet high. So it says you should walk down to the river. And I'm accepting this as my next initiation because I've been told that that's what's happening. So I'm like, okay, I'm not really sure if I feel comfortable about this, but maybe that's the point. And I'm going to screw up my courage and walk down to the river. I get maybe, I don't know, 100 feet down. It's a 300-foot walk maybe. And I start freaking out. I start freezing because I realize that the next step, I'm in tall grass in Brazil. Any next step could be my last because of a snake or something. So I freeze and I don't know what to do. I don't want to go back because there's tall grass there too. I can see the river way off in the distance and an X on a building next to this bridge that goes over the river. And I think, well, that's where I want to get. But I'm terrified to take my next step. So I take each time before I take a step, I just surrender it to the Holy Spirit and ask to be guided in the right direction. So after another 15 minutes or so of heart-pounding action, I get to the bridge. And I think, oh, thank God, I made it. But what I realize is that now I've got to go back. And I'm terrified about going back. And something happens inside. And I think this is an essential switch because it happens later in the trip for me as well at John of God. And other times as well, is that I take some compassion on myself. And I think, well, what would be an easier way? And this is really an essential lesson that the masculine is not strong on its own. The masculine is strong when it's informed and supported by the feminine. Where this doesn't have to be somebody outside of you. It can just be compassion for yourself. It's a feminine frequency. Loving, compassion, unconditional acceptance of you as you are. So I try to go into that frequency instead of the terror of walking back through the reeds. And my little voice just says, walk up the river. I think, oh my God, I can just walk up the river, because that goes back to the same place that I'd been. But the concern is that there's a sacred waterfall up the river, and you can only go there by special permit. And so special groups go in, private groups go in, and then another private groups go in pretty much all day. And I don't want to come upriver and come upon them unexpectedly and not being welcomed. My little voice says, no, just go. So I'm like, okay. So one of my fun experiences on this pathway is I'm walking up this river, and I look to the left, and it's right out of Lord of the Rings. There's this staff. It's about 5 feet long. It looks like it's about that big around. It's made out of bone, I guess. I don't know what it's made out of. You'd think it'd be a tree, but it looks like bone. It looks like white bone. And it's pretty much straight. It's about 5 feet long. And it's just leaning. Part of it's in the river, and part of it's resting on a mossy bank in the sunlight. It looks just like the parting of the bushes part, and boom, there's this sunlight hitting this staff. And my little voice says, go take the staff. And so I take the staff, and I'm walking up the river with this staff. Like I say, I feel like Gandalf or somebody. And I get up to where the sacred waterfall is, and there's nobody there. So I go and I go under the sacred waterfall, and I don't like going off the grid at John of God. I want to respect the Casa. And I have a profound connection with Jeshua. And when I check with him, he says, no, they work for me. So if I'm asking you to do this, trust me, they would approve if we all sat down and talked about it. So I'm just respectfully praying that I am in fact respecting the higher law of everything happening at the Casa. So I have that experience. I walk up and out. That was the final initiation for me, walking through that and really learning to surrender to the feminine, to love the feminine. So it's a little while later in the trip, and I literally have not mentioned King David to anyone, but I know that that's what's happening. That's the soul that's being worked on here. And I'm sitting at a juice bar. There's no drinking allowed in the whole kind of area of town that's built up around the Casa, where all these little posadas and everybody going to the Casa stays at these little posadas. And the place everybody's gathers, there are 2 juice bars, one on either side of the street. And the Casa's at the end of this road, which goes down a hill, and the juice bars are on either side. So I'm at one of these, and I'm sitting with 2 young women and having a nice chat. One of them had very strong Mary Magdalene energy, and she'd been there healing herself of AIDS, though she hadn't had sex. It was just her family were drug addicts, and so she picked it up in that environment from the needles or whatever. And this woman starts walking down the street. Now, in my experience, having done this all this time, I have this sense of having a Egyptian priestess detector inside of me, a soul who was an Egyptian priestess. I feel I can tell, and have had that experience confirmed many times, as best we can tell. This woman's walking down the street. I've never seen her before in my life, and I think to myself, that woman is drenched with the most Egyptian priestess energy of anyone I've ever seen. She walks down the street and comes straight over and sits down with us. Again, never seen her before in my life. And I'm not waving or anything. She just does this. There's one extra seat at the table. And she sits down, and I think I'll have a little fun with this. So I say, "Priestess, what have you come to tell us?" Instead of all the normal formalities and so on. And she goes, "Oh my God, you're the first person who's ever seen that in me." And she was from Israel and had an Egyptian name. And I'm like, really? Because it's so obvious. It's so obvious that that's who you are. So she says, well, what I've come to tell you, and this to me was a sign that maybe I was starting to get it on the compassion piece and the healing of the masculine. Is what I've come to tell you is that you have the capacity to heal any woman's relationship with the masculine, and you're further along than you think. I'm like, that's really a beautiful message, and I would, if anything, if I could do that, I would love that, because I consider myself in service to the feminine. That's what I would, and in service to Mary Magdalene, that would be wonderful if that were true. So I'm very happy about that. But she then looks at the woman who's quite similar to Mary Magdalene, and they both agree, this is having met 2 minutes earlier, that they're supposed to take me to the Casa. So they take me to the casa, and I'm following them, following the feminine. Of course, I'm going to say yes. We go down to the casa, and both of them have the same spot in mind as being the most sacred point in the casa. And I'd be amazed if anybody else thinks the same place. It's actually around back from where John of God sits when he's doing his healing work, outside of the building on a porch behind. Under the picture, they both felt the same thing. Under the picture of King Solomon. Now, those of you who know about King Solomon will know that he was David's son and was given the job of building the temple when David was not given that job for whatever reason. Solomon is one of the healing entities at the casa, and nothing could be more appropriate for my exploration of the healing of King David than being in this place. We do this ceremony under the picture of Solomon. And I feel, his entity is actually going to be present because of where we are and what's happening. And I'll just say from my intention, just taking on the idea of having possibly been David. I'm just going to accept it because Joshua shared this. We'll just run with it. And it was a heartfelt feeling, too, as someone who's had the role of being an earthly king, and more than once, if I'm correct in my guidance and what others have told me. The real realization is that the earthly king gladly and humbly bows to the true king, the Christ, and that Christ that lives in all of us. The job of a king is to let everybody know that they're also of the same quality as the king, to use that voice, the authority they've been given, to remind everyone that they're of royalty in truth. So I just surrender profoundly and gratefully and completely the earthly kingdom to the heavenly kingdom. And I feel it happen inside. I feel the healing of this ancient thing in me that was recreated at my fall at 16, perhaps was there in David's life in which he felt like he cursed the nation. I feel it healed. I feel David healed. And I know that the way healing works is it comes first in a feeling, kind of, I guess you call it an etheric state, and then the mind catches up. So we're done, and I know the Israeli woman, the priestess, is going to be leaving, and I'm never going to see her again. And so I have two questions for her. I say, just one question. What would you say is the key to the mystery schools, O divine priestess? And she says, I say in one sentence, because we just have a minute. She goes, testosterone management. And I'm like, we're agreed on that one. And then I think, but I'm still not getting the David piece in my head. And she says, and I say, and I haven't mentioned David to anybody on the trip at all, period, not one time. And this is the first time I mention it. And I say to her, well, that David, so Solomon, he's David's son, right? King David's son? She goes, yes. I go, that David, he sure was messed up. Hey, he had a messed up life. And she looks at me and she goes, if you think that, you know nothing about him. And I go, oh my God, here it comes. And she goes, at the end of his life, no matter what he did, no matter what the situation was, the story, the sin or the not sin or the whatever, he came to God and asked for forgiveness and always brought himself to God. And God, when he did, God said, you are a man after my own heart. And how can you judge David's life if that was God's judgment? God said, yes, you are a man after my own heart. God's judgment was this on David because David brought it all back to God. And it's a symbol for every life. All the things that we do, good and bad, if we bring it back to God, it's all okay. That's what that life symbolizes. And when she said that to me and told me, you can't argue with God on this, I thought, my God, she's right. And true forgiveness came to my masculine judgment, and the judgment of this ancient soul perhaps as well, at this amazing place, John of God. And at that point, I started having this sense of a steel gray colored Star of David hovering by my right hip that was with me ever after that, and leading up to what would become the most important part of my spiritual service, the most extraordinary aspect of my journey, and the reason I believe I incarnated in this life, and that would be fulfilled in Israel in a year later, later that same year in 2011. We'll lead up to that in the next video. Thank you for listening.